Before we begin, I need you to do something. Type HOPE in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters to this community. Now, let me tell you about Marcus, a CEO worth millions who received the most terrifying phone call of his life. His 7-year-old daughter, trapped under rubble after an earthquake, protecting her baby siblings in the dark. This is their story of survival, courage, and what happens when a family refuses to break. If this story touches your heart, please like and share. Let's begin. The mahogany conference table stretched like an airport runway between 27 executives, each one wearing the same practiced smile that meant absolutely nothing. Marcus Thorne, 38 years old and worth approximately $400 million, sat at the head of that table with his tattooed hands folded, his grey-streaked beard perfectly trimmed, and his mind somewhere else entirely, 7,000 miles away to be precise, where his 4 children were starting their morning without him. The investors from Shanghai were mid-presentation, their translator's voice a monotonous drone, about market penetration and quarterly projections, when Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He ignored it. Company policy during acquisitions. No interruptions, no exceptions, no matter what. The phone buzzed again, then again. His jaw tightened. Something whispered wrong in the back of his mind, that primal instinct parents develop that can sense danger to their children across continents. "Excuse me for one moment," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the translator's speech like a knife through silk. 27 pairs of eyes turned to him, with varying degrees of annoyance and curiosity. The tattoos crawling up his neck and disappearing into his custom-tailored collar still made some of them uncomfortable, even after 3 years of record-breaking profits under his leadership. He pulled out his phone and saw 15 missed calls from home. His heart dropped into his stomach. Before he could return the call, it rang again. "Daddy?" The voice on the other end was small, broken, terrified, his 7-year-old daughter, Megan. But it was the sound behind her voice that froze Marcus's blood. Sirens wailing, people screaming, and a low rumbling that sounded like the earth itself was groaning in pain. "Daddy." Our house collapsed. There was shaking and everything fell down. "I'm scared. I'm hiding under a big concrete piece with Noah, Chloe, and Mason. They're crying. I don't know where Mommy is." The room full of executives might as well have ceased to exist. Marcus was already standing, his chair rolling backward and hitting the wall. "Baby, listen to me very carefully. Are you hurt? Can you move?" His voice remained steady despite the panic clawing at his throat, that CEO composure now serving a far more important purpose than negotiating billion-dollar deals. "My arm hurts, but I can move it. The babies are okay, I think. Noah has a cut on his head, but he's stopped crying. Daddy, when are you coming? It's dark here, and I can hear people screaming outside. I'm trying to keep the babies quiet like you taught me, but Mason won't stop crying for Mommy." Marcus was already moving toward the door, his phone pressed so hard against his ear it would leave a mark. "I'm coming right now, sweetheart, right now. You're being so brave. I'm so proud of you. Keep the babies calm and stay exactly where you are. Don't try to move anything. Do you understand? Daddy's coming." Behind him, the executives were murmuring in confusion, the translator awkwardly trying to explain what was happening, but Marcus couldn't have cared less if the entire deal collapsed along with his house. His assistant Jennifer met him in the hallway, her face pale. "Mr. Thorne, I just heard about the earthquake, magnitude 7.3. It hit the coastal region where your home is located. I've already contacted your pilot. The jet's being prepped now, but—" She hesitated, and Marcus knew what was coming. "Sir, the airport near your home is closed. All flights are grounded. The damage is catastrophic." "Then find me the nearest operational airport. I don't care if I have to parachute in." Marcus was already in the elevator, jabbing the button for the ground floor repeatedly, as if that would make it move faster. Jennifer followed, her heels clicking rapidly as she worked her phone. And get me every contact we have in emergency services in that region. Police, fire department, National Guard, I don't care who. Someone with boots on the ground who can get to my family right now. The elevator felt like it was moving through molasses. Marcus's mind was racing through worst-case scenarios he'd spent years trying not to imagine. Megan, his brave little girl who'd learned to read at 4 and could recite the periodic table at 6, now trapped in darkness protecting her infant siblings. The triplets, 11 months old, barely walking, completely dependent, crying for their mother while the earth swallowed their home. And Victoria, his wife, his anchor, the only person who'd seen past his tattooed exterior to the scared kid from foster care who'd clawed his way to the top and never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. Where was she? The elevator doors opened to the lobby and Marcus broke into a run, his $5,000 shoes pounding across marble floors. His driver was already waiting, the black SUV idling at the curb with the door open. Airport. Emergency protocols. Do not stop for anything. Marcus barely finished the sentence before the car lurched into traffic, the driver navigating through the city streets with controlled urgency. Jennifer's voice came through his phone speaker. "Sir, I've got someone. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Pacific Region Search and Rescue. She's already deployed to your neighborhood, patching you through now." "Lieutenant Chen, this is Marcus Thorne. My 7-year-old daughter and 3 infant sons are trapped under rubble at 42 Riverside Drive. My daughter called me 12 minutes ago. She says they're under a concrete slab. She has mobility. One child has a head injury but is conscious. My wife is unaccounted for. I need you to make them your priority." There was a pause, and Marcus could hear the chaos on the other end. Helicopters, shouting, the sound of heavy machinery. "Mr. Thorne, I understand your situation, but we have over 200 confirmed trapped individuals in this sector alone. We're moving as fast as—" "Lieutenant." Marcus's voice dropped to that tone that had made billion-dollar corporations reconsider their positions. Not aggressive, not pleading, but absolutely unmovable. "I'm going to be very clear about something. I will personally fund whatever equipment, personnel, or resources you need for the next month. I will donate $10 million to your department within the hour. But right now, my daughter is keeping 3 babies alive in the dark, and you're going to find them first. Are we understood?" Another pause. "Sir, I can't accept—" "You're not accepting anything. You're doing your job, and I'm doing mine as a father. The donation happens regardless, but those 4 children are going to see their father again today. Give me GPS coordinates of the nearest operational landing site to Riverside Drive. My helicopter will be there in 3 hours. Mr. Thorne, the jet from your location won't take 3 hours from where I am." "I'm not where you think I am." Marcus realized she'd assumed he was overseas, probably because the news would be reporting the earthquake had just happened hours ago. "I was in Houston for meetings. I'm 20 minutes from my private airfield. Now give me those coordinates." As Lieutenant Chen rattled off numbers that Jennifer immediately relayed to the pilot, Marcus felt his phone buzz with an incoming call. His mother-in-law. His hand trembled as he answered. "Diane?" "Marcus, thank God. Have you heard from Victoria? I've been trying to reach her all morning. The news is showing our neighborhood, and I can't—" Her voice broke. Diane was a strong woman, a former nurse who'd raised Victoria alone after her husband died, but Marcus could hear the terror beneath her words. "The kids are alive. Megan called me. They're trapped, but conscious. Victoria." He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the words that would make it real. "Diane, I need you to stay by your phone. The second I know anything about Victoria, you'll be my first call. But right now, I need to focus on getting to those kids. Can you do that for me?" "Of course. Marcus—" Her voice softened. "Bring our babies home. I will. I promise you I will." He ended the call just as the SUV screeched into the private airfield. His jet was on the tarmac, engines already whining to life, stairs deployed. Marcus was out of the car before it fully stopped, taking the stairs 2 at a time. His pilot, Rodriguez, met him at the top. "We've got clearance for priority flight path. 2 hours and 17 minutes to the nearest operational airport. Then you've got a helicopter waiting. Sir, I have to warn you, the images coming from that region are devastating. The infrastructure is gone. Getting around will be, then we'll walk. We'll crawl if we have to. Just get me there, Rodriguez." Marcus strapped himself into the seat, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles went white. The jet began to move, accelerating down the runway, and all Marcus could think about was that phone call. Megan's small voice, the fear she was trying so hard to hide, the sound of babies crying in the background. He pulled out his phone and called Megan's number again. It rang 7 times before her small voice answered. "Daddy? Hey, sweetheart, just checking on you. How are the babies?" Noah fell asleep. Chloe is sucking her thumb. Mason is still fussy, but I'm singing to him like Mommy does. "Daddy, my arm really hurts now." And I can hear water dripping somewhere. It sounds close. Marcus closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay calm. A gas line rupture would be catastrophic. Water meant a broken pipe, which could mean flooding, which could mean... He stopped that thought before it could fully form. "You're doing such a good job, baby. The rescue people know where you are now. They're coming, and Daddy's in an airplane right now coming too. But Megan, I need you to tell me something. When the shaking started, where was Mommy?" There was a pause, and he could hear Megan talking softly to one of the babies. "She was in the kitchen, making bottles for the triplets. She told me to take them to the playroom. I heard her yelling my name when everything started falling. Then it got really loud and dusty, and I couldn't see anything. I grabbed the babies and we got under the table, but then the ceiling came down and now we're stuck here." "Did you hear Mommy after that? Any sound at all?" "No, Daddy. I called and called, but she didn't answer. The kitchen is where the most crashing sounds came from." Megan's voice was getting smaller, younger, and Marcus realized she was starting to understand what that might mean. "Okay, baby, save your phone battery. I'm going to call you back every 15 minutes to check on you. If anything changes, if you hear people calling, if the babies need something urgent, if you need me, you call immediately. Deal? Deal. Daddy, will Mommy be okay?" Marcus Thorne, who'd built an empire through calculated risks and cold negotiations, who'd never lied in a business deal because his word was his currency, found himself at a crossroads between truth and hope. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I promise you this, we're going to find her, and no matter what, you and those babies are safe. Daddy's coming." After he hung up, Marcus stared out the window at the clouds streaming past. Below, somewhere in that vast expanse of earth and sky, his family was buried alive. And above him, strapped into a leather seat in a plane worth $15 million, surrounded by all the wealth and power he'd accumulated, he'd never felt more helpless in his life. The tattoos on his arms, each one marking a significant moment in his climb from poverty to prosperity, suddenly felt like hollow decorations. What good was any of it if he couldn't save his children? Jennifer's voice came through his phone. "Sir, I've wired the $10 million to the search and rescue department. Also, I've arranged ground transportation at the airport, a military-grade vehicle capable of navigating debris. And Mr. Thorne, the media is already picking up on your involvement. They're calling you a hero for the donation." "I don't want to be a hero, Jennifer. I want to be a father who gets there in time." Marcus rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 38 years and then some. "Contact every hospital within a 100-mile radius of the earthquake zone. If Victoria was rescued and taken somewhere, I want to know immediately. Also, find me the best trauma counselors for children. Those kids are going to need help processing whatever they've been through." "Already done, sir." And Mr. Thorne, For what it's worth, those kids are lucky to have you." Marcus didn't feel lucky. He felt like he'd failed them by not being there, by being on the other side of the country making money they didn't need, instead of being home where he belonged. But he pushed that guilt aside. There would be time for self-recrimination later. Right now, every second counted. The next 2 hours were the longest of Marcus's life. He called Megan every 15 minutes exactly, each time hearing the weariness growing in her voice, the baby's cries getting weaker as exhaustion took over. He coordinated with Lieutenant Chen, who confirmed that her team had located the approximate position of his house and were working to stabilize the surrounding structures before attempting rescue. He spoke with his mother-in-law 3 more times, each conversation shorter and harder than the last, as hope dwindled that Victoria might have been found alive elsewhere. When the jet finally touched down, Marcus was moving before the wheels fully stopped rolling. The helicopter was waiting exactly where Jennifer had promised, a military surplus bird with a pilot who looked like he'd seen active combat. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Captain Willis. Been briefed on the situation. We'll have you on the ground at Riverside Drive in 8 minutes. 8 minutes. The same amount of time Marcus usually spent choosing which watch to wear. Now it felt like an eternity. The helicopter lifted off, and Marcus got his first aerial view of the destruction. His breath caught. The earthquake had transformed the landscape into something apocalyptic. Buildings that had stood for decades were now piles of rubble. Roads had split open like wounds in the earth. Fires burned in scattered locations, smoke rising in dark columns. Emergency vehicles created tiny dots of red and blue light throughout the devastation. "Riverside Drive coming up," Captain Willis announced. "Sir, I need to prepare you. The residential sector took the worst of it. Most structures are completely collapsed." Marcus leaned forward, scanning the ground. When he saw what remained of his neighborhood, his heart stopped. Where there had once been streets lined with comfortable homes and mature trees, there was now an unrecognizable landscape of destruction. His house, the place where Megan had taken her first steps, where he'd rocked the triplets to sleep, where Victoria had painted the nursery walls with clouds and stars, was gone. In its place was a chaotic pile of wood, concrete, and shattered dreams. "That's it," Marcus said quietly, pointing to where he could just make out the remnants of his backyard fence. "Set down as close as you can." The helicopter landed in what used to be a neighbor's yard. Marcus was out before the skids fully touched earth, running toward the ruins of his home. Emergency workers turned to look at him, this tattooed man in a business suit sprinting through rubble, but Lieutenant Chen was there, intercepting him before he could do something dangerous. "Mr. Thorne, I need you to stay back. The structure is extremely unstable. We've got dogs indicating life signs in the northwest quadrant, which matches where your daughter said they were. We're bringing in specialized equipment to—" "Where?" Marcus demanded. "Show me where." Chen hesitated, then led him to a spot where 3 emergency workers were carefully removing debris, piece by piece. A search dog sat alertly nearby, its handler keeping it focused on a specific area. They're approximately 15 feet in, under what appears to be a reinforced concrete section that may have created a protective void. It's the only reason they're likely still alive. Marcus dropped to his knees at the edge of the debris field. "Megan! Can you hear me? It's Daddy!" For a terrible moment, there was nothing but the sound of emergency equipment and distant sirens. Then, faint but unmistakable, "Daddy? I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Are you okay?" "You came." The relief in her voice nearly broke him. "The babies are really sleepy, and it's hard to breathe. Daddy, I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart, but these nice people are going to get you out very soon. You just need to hold on a little longer. Can you do that for me?" "I can." "Daddy, I think I hear Mommy. She's calling my name, but it sounds far away." Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes locking with Lieutenant Chen's. "You heard that? Victoria could be alive." "Mr. Thorne, trapped people can experience auditory hallucinations due to stress or my wife is buried somewhere in there calling for our daughter. Either way, we're finding her." Marcus's voice carried that unmovable quality again. "After you get the kids out, you keep digging, you find my wife." "The key, sir, we have protocols about—" "Then I'll dig myself, with my bare hands if I have to, but we're not leaving her." Chen studied him for a moment. This powerful man reduced to desperation by love, and something in her expression softened. "We'll keep searching, Mr. Thorne, I promise you that. Now please step back and let my team work." The next 47 minutes were excavated from Marcus's soul, 1 second at a time. He watched the rescue team work with agonizing precision, removing debris piece by microscopic piece to avoid triggering a collapse. Every crack and groan from the unstable structure made his heart seize. He called down to Megan twice more, each time hearing her voice grow weaker, the baby's barely making sounds anymore. The sun was beginning its descent toward evening when Lieutenant Chen suddenly raised her hand, halting all work. "We've got visual," she announced into her radio. 4 children, ages appear correct, preparing for extraction. She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, we're about to bring them out. I need you to stay calm regardless of what you see. They may have injuries that look worse than they are. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. He positioned himself exactly where Chen indicated, his entire body trembling with anticipation and dread. The emergency workers moved faster now, enlarging the opening they'd created. Marcus could hear Megan talking to the rescuers, her brave little voice guiding them. Then he saw her. A rescue worker carefully handed up a small form. His daughter covered in dust, her pink pajamas torn and dirty, her left arm cradled against her chest, but alive. Gloriously, miraculously alive. Marcus surged forward, and Chen didn't stop him this time. He gathered Megan into his arms as gently as he could, and she buried her face against his chest and finally let herself cry. "I got them out, Daddy. I kept them safe like you always taught me. You did perfect, baby. You were so brave." Marcus was crying too now, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face, not caring who saw. His daughter was alive in his arms. Over her shoulder he watched as the rescue workers brought up 3 more small bundles, Noah, Chloe and Mason. The triplets he'd held every morning before work, sung to every night before bed. They were frighteningly quiet, covered in dust but breathing, all breathing. Paramedics swarmed in immediately. Marcus reluctantly released Megan to their care, watching as they checked her vitals, examined her arm, shined lights in her eyes. She kept looking back at him, making sure he was still there. The triplets were each being assessed by separate teams. Marcus moved between them, touching each small hand, whispering reassurances. "Mr. Thorne." A paramedic approached him. "Your daughter has a fractured ulna in her left arm and significant dehydration, but she's stable. The triplets are showing signs of respiratory distress from dust inhalation, and the boy has a minor head laceration that will need stitches, but overall, they're in remarkably good condition considering their ordeal. We're transporting them to Central Memorial Hospital. I'm going with them." "Sir, there's only room in the ambulance for—" "Then I'll ride on the hood. I'm not leaving them again." Marcus's tone left no room for negotiation. The paramedic glanced at his supervisor, who nodded. "Fine, but Mr. Thorne, about your wife. They keep digging until they find her, whatever it takes." Marcus looked back at Lieutenant Chen, who was already organizing her team to continue the search. Their eyes met across the ruins, and she gave him a small nod. She understood. In this moment, Marcus Thorne might be a CEO worth hundreds of millions, but he was also just a man desperate to bring his family home whole. The ambulance ride was a blur. Marcus sat holding Megan's good hand while the paramedics worked on the triplets, administering oxygen, checking vitals. Megan kept drifting in and out of consciousness, exhaustion finally overwhelming her adrenaline. Each time her eyes fluttered open, she'd look for Marcus, and he'd squeeze her hand gently. "Daddy, did you find Mommy yet?" "Not yet, baby, but they're still looking. You focus on feeling better, okay?" At the hospital, chaos reigned. The earthquake had filled the emergency rooms beyond capacity. But when Marcus Thorne walked in carrying his daughter, while 3 gurneys with his infant sons followed, staff appeared as if by magic. Jennifer had called ahead. Private rooms were prepared. The best pediatric specialists were summoned. Hours passed in a clinical haze. Megan's arm was set and casted, painted purple at her request. The triplets were treated for smoke inhalation and mild dehydration. Noah's head wound received 6 small stitches, which he slept through. By midnight, all 4 children were stable, sleeping peacefully in a private suite that Jennifer had arranged. Marcus sat in a chair between Megan's bed and the triplets' cribs, his phone in his hand, waiting. He'd changed out of his ruined suit into hospital scrubs someone had provided. The tattoos on his arms were fully visible now, the phoenix rising on his right forearm, the compass on his left wrist, the coordinates of the foster home where he'd aged out of the system written in tiny script along his collarbone. Each marking told a story of survival, of transformation, of refusing to be defined by circumstances. At 2:17 in the morning his phone finally rang, Lieutenant Chen's name on the screen. Marcus stepped into the hallway before answering, his hand shaking. "Mr. Thorne, we found your wife." Marcus's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall. "Is she—" "She's alive, critical condition, being transported to Central Memorial now. Multiple injuries, including possible spinal trauma. Mr. Thorne, I need you to understand that the next 72 hours will be crucial, but she survived being buried for almost 18 hours. That's remarkable." Marcus couldn't speak. He simply nodded, forgetting she couldn't see him, and managed a rough "thank you" before his voice gave out entirely. Victoria was alive. Against all odds, impossibilities, and rational expectations, his wife had survived. He stumbled back into the room where his children slept and sank into the chair. Megan stirred, her eyes opening slightly. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay now. Mommy's coming home." But even as he said it, Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The physical recovery would be challenging enough, but the emotional scars, what this day had carved into his children's psyches, what fears had been planted in Megan's soul as she kept 3 babies alive in the dark, those would take years to heal. And Victoria's injuries were still unknown. Critical condition could mean anything. Still, as Marcus sat there watching his 4 children breathe, watching their small chests rise and fall in the rhythm of life, he felt something he hadn't expected. Gratitude. His family was alive, fractured, traumatized, but alive, and he'd learned something profound in the worst hours of his life. The tattoos, the money, the power, the empire he'd built, none of it had mattered when his daughter's voice came through that phone line. What mattered was being there. What mattered was the courage of a 7-year-old girl who'd kept her siblings alive. What mattered was the team of strangers who dug through rubble because it was their job, because they cared, because somewhere in the machinery of emergency services existed people who understood that every life buried in those ruins was someone's entire world. Marcus pulled out his phone and typed an email to Jennifer. Effective immediately. Establish the Megan Thorne Foundation for Emergency Response Services. Initial funding $200 million. Hire the best people. I want scholarships for first responders' children, equipment grants for underfunded departments, and support systems for rescue workers dealing with PTSD. Get it done. He pressed send and set the phone aside. 200 million wouldn't bring back the hundreds who died in the earthquake. It wouldn't erase the trauma his children had experienced, but it would honor his daughter's bravery and ensure that other families might have the same chance at survival his had been given. At 4:30 in the morning, Victoria arrived. Marcus met the gurney at the emergency entrance, and what he saw made his breath catch. She was barely recognizable beneath the injuries, her face swollen and bruised, her body immobilized on a spine board, tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. But her eyes were open, and when she saw Marcus, they filled with tears. "The kids," she whispered through split lips. "Safe, all 4 of them. Megan saved them, Victoria. Our little girl was a hero." Victoria's eyes closed in relief, and Marcus walked alongside the gurney as they rushed her into surgery. The orthopedic surgeon intercepted him outside the operating room with the preliminary assessment: 3 fractured ribs, a ruptured spleen, a shattered pelvis, and yes, damage to her lower spine that might mean paralysis. The next 8 hours of surgery would determine her future. Marcus called his mother-in-law with the update. Diane's sob of relief echoed through the phone. "I'm coming to the hospital now." "Diane, it's 5 in the morning. Wait until—" "Marcus, my daughter and grandchildren almost died yesterday. I'm not waiting for anything ever again." "Fair point." Marcus returned to the children's room to find Megan awake, sitting up despite the early hour. "I heard them bring Mommy in. Is she okay?" "How did you tell a 7-year-old that her mother might never walk again? That the woman who danced with her in the kitchen and chased her through the park might spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair?" Marcus sat on the edge of her bed and took her good hand. "Mommy's hurt pretty badly, sweetheart. The doctors are helping her right now. It's going to be a long time before she's better, but she's alive, and that's what matters most. She would want you to know how proud she is of you. I kept calling for her after the shaking stopped. I thought maybe she was gone." Megan's voice broke, and suddenly she wasn't a brave little hero anymore. She was just a scared kid who'd been through something no child should experience. Marcus pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her cast. But she wasn't gone. She was there the whole time, fighting to get back to you, just like you fought to keep the babies safe. "Our family is made of fighters, Megan. We don't give up." The triplets began to wake, their morning cries filling the room, a sound Marcus had sometimes found annoying during those exhausted 3 a.m. feedings, but which now sounded like the most beautiful music imaginable. He and Megan worked together to soothe them, changing diapers and preparing bottles the nurses had provided. It was almost normal, this routine they'd performed hundreds of times before, except for the hospital setting and the weight of everything unspoken between them. Diane arrived as the sun was rising, her eyes red from crying, but her spine straight with determination. She swept into the room and gathered Megan into her arms, then moved to each triplet, touching their heads, whispering thank yous to whatever forces had spared them. Then she turned to Marcus. "Thank you for bringing them home." "I didn't do anything, Diane. Your granddaughter did everything. You got there. You moved mountains to get there. That matters." She studied him with those sharp eyes that had always seen past his tattoos to who he really was. "How are you holding up?" Marcus realized he hadn't thought about himself once since that first phone call. "I'm fine. The kids are what matter." "You matter too, Marcus. You're allowed to fall apart. I'll fall apart later. Right now my family needs me standing." Victoria's surgery stretched into its 12th hour. Marcus paced the surgical waiting room, phone in hand, updating Jennifer every hour with instructions for managing the business in his absence. His vice president could handle the day-to-day operations, but major decisions needed Marcus's approval. Except he couldn't bring himself to care about market shares and acquisition targets when his wife was fighting for her ability to walk. Diane had taken over the children's care with the competence of a former nurse, giving Marcus permission to focus on Victoria. Megan had asked to see her father every hour, needing reassurance he was still there, still real, still keeping his promise not to leave. Each time, Marcus would return to the surgical floor feeling torn between two impossible needs. At hour 14, the orthopedic surgeon finally emerged, his surgical cap stained with sweat. "Mr. Thorne, your wife is in recovery. The splenectomy was successful. We've stabilized the pelvic fractures with pins and plates. But the spinal injury—" He paused, and Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. "There's significant damage to the L4 and L5 vertebrae. We've relieved the pressure on the spinal cord, but until the swelling decreases, we won't know the full extent of nerve damage. She may regain full mobility. She may have permanent deficits, or something in between. We'll know more in 48 to 72 hours. Can I see her? She's sedated and will be for the next 12 hours at minimum, but yes, you can sit with her." Marcus found Victoria in the ICU, looking impossibly fragile against the stark white sheets. The machines surrounding her beeped and hummed, tracking every breath, every heartbeat. He pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines. "Hey, beautiful," he whispered. "The kids are safe. Megan's got a purple cast. She's already decorating with markers. The triplets are eating everything in sight. Your mom's here helping. We're all just waiting for you to wake up so we can be a family again." Victoria's fingers twitched slightly in his hand. Marcus chose to interpret it as acknowledgement, as her fighting spirit asserting itself even through sedation. He thought about the day they'd met, 12 years ago, at a charity function he'd attended reluctantly. She'd been serving on the fundraising committee, and when she'd approached him for a donation, she hadn't flinched at his appearance. Instead, she'd looked directly into his eyes and seen something worth knowing. Their first date had lasted 9 hours, conversation flowing so naturally that closing time at the restaurant came as a surprise. She'd told him about her dreams of creating art, about losing her father young, about wanting children someday who she could give the stable childhood she'd been lucky enough to have. He'd told her things he'd never shared with anyone, about the foster homes, the group facilities, the determination to never be that powerless again. When he'd proposed 2 years later, he'd been terrified she'd realize she could do better than a tattooed, former foster kid who'd lucked into money. But Victoria had simply laughed and said, "Marcus, I don't care what your arms look like. I care what your heart looks like, and it's beautiful." Now that heart was breaking as he sat beside her, watching machines breathe for her, wondering if she'd ever dance again, ever chase their children through the house, ever live without pain. His phone buzzed. A text from Lieutenant Chen. "Mr. Thorne, preliminary findings suggest earthquake was triggered by unmarked fault line. Investigation ongoing into why geological surveys missed it. Your home's location was epicenter of damage. You should know. Your daughter's quick thinking with the triplets is being studied by emergency child psychology experts. She did everything right." Marcus filed that information away. There would be time later to understand why his neighborhood had been destroyed, to pursue accountability if negligence was involved. Right now, he was simply grateful his daughter had inherited his survival instincts and Victoria's courage. Over the next 36 hours, a rhythm established itself. Marcus split his time between Victoria's ICU room and the children's suite. Diane managed the triplets with practiced ease, while Megan appointed herself the assistant nurse, helping with bottles and diaper changes despite her caste. Hospital staff bent rules about visiting hours, recognizing that this family needed to be together. The media frenzy had begun, despite Jennifer's attempts to keep Marcus's involvement quiet. The story had everything: wealthy CEO, dramatic rescue, heroic child. Camera crews camped outside the hospital. Marcus's donation to the search and rescue department had gone public, inspiring other wealthy individuals to contribute to relief efforts. Someone had leaked photos of Marcus arriving at the disaster site, and the image of a tattooed man in a business suit running through rubble toward his children had gone viral. Jennifer fielded dozens of interview requests daily. "Sir, Good Morning America wants an exclusive. So does CNN. The public response has been overwhelmingly positive. People are calling you an inspiration. Proof that successful people can also be devoted parents. The tattoo community especially is celebrating your visibility. I don't want to be anyone's inspiration, Jennifer. I just want my wife to wake up. I understand, but when you're ready, this could be an opportunity to control the narrative. To show the world that your family's story is about love and resilience, not just tragedy." Marcus considered this. He'd spent years being judged for his appearance, having his competence questioned because of his tattoos, being stereotyped as dangerous or unprofessional despite his business success. Now millions of people were seeing a different story. A father who dropped everything to save his children, a man whose appearance didn't define his character. Maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe there was value in sharing their story if it helped even one person reconsider their prejudices. On the evening of the second day post-surgery, Victoria began to wake. Marcus was there, his hand holding hers, when her eyes fluttered open. She looked confused at first, disoriented by the tubes and machines. Then her gaze found Marcus, and tears slipped down her cheeks. "The babies." Her voice was barely a whisper, raw from intubation. "Perfect, healthy, safe. Megan too. We're all okay, Victoria. You saved them by sending Megan to that playroom with them. That room had the reinforced ceiling that protected them. I couldn't get to them. The ceiling fell so fast, I tried." "Shh, you did everything right. You're here now, and that's what matters." Marcus kissed her forehead gently. "The doctors say you need to rest. Let your body heal. We've got time to worry about everything else later." "Can't feel my legs, Marcus." The words came out flat, factual, but Marcus heard the terror beneath them. "I know. There's swelling on your spine. They're monitoring it closely. In a few days we'll know more. But Victoria, whatever happens, we handle it. Together." She studied his face, reading the truth he wasn't saying. That paralysis was possible, that their lives might be permanently changed, that the future they'd planned might need to be reimagined entirely. But she also saw his determination, his refusal to let their family be broken by circumstances. "Want to see the kids?" she whispered. "Diane's bringing them down now. I called her the moment you started waking up." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Brace yourself, though. Megan's got some strong opinions about the color purple, and she's decorated her entire cast with drawings of the triplets." A smile ghosted across Victoria's swollen face. "She gets that from you, the artistic streak. She gets the bravery from you." Diane arrived pushing a specialized wheelchair that could accommodate all three triplets, with Megan walking carefully beside her grandmother. The moment Megan saw her mother awake, she burst into tears and rushed forward. Victoria's face transformed with emotion as she reached out her good arm. "Careful, sweetheart, Mama's pretty sore." "I'm sorry I couldn't find you. I tried to dig, but there was too much stuff and the babies were crying." "You did exactly what I needed you to do. You kept your brothers and sisters safe. I'm so incredibly proud of you." Victoria looked past Megan to where Diane was lifting the triplets one by one for her to see. Noah, with his tiny stitches covered by a colorful bandage. Chloe, who'd apparently decided hospital life agreed with her and was all smiles. Mason, the sensitive one, who seemed to understand something serious had happened and was unusually quiet. "My babies," Victoria whispered, touching each small head as Diane brought them close. "My miracles." Watching his family reunite, Marcus felt something unlock in his chest that he hadn't realized was constricted. For 72 hours he'd been running on pure adrenaline and determination, refusing to process the horror of that initial phone call, the nightmare of the rescue, the uncertainty of Victoria's condition. Now, seeing his wife awake and his children safe in the same room, the reality of how close he'd come to losing everything finally hit him. He stepped out into the hallway, his legs suddenly unsteady, and sank down against the wall. His hands were shaking. His breath came in short gasps. The full weight of the trauma, not just his family's, but his own, crashed over him like a delayed wave. Diane found him there 15 minutes later, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him without a word and put her arm around his shoulders. "It's okay to break down now, Marcus. You've earned it." "I almost lost them, Diane. All of them. If Megan hadn't been as brave as she was, if the rescue team had been even an hour slower, if that concrete slab hadn't fallen at exactly the right angle, but none of those things happened. Your children are alive. Your wife is alive. You got there in time. This time. But what about next time? What if there's another earthquake? What if something happens when I'm actually overseas? What if I can't—" "Stop." Diane's voice was firm. "You can't live your life terrified of hypothetical disasters. This was a terrible, traumatic thing that happened. But it's over now. Your job is to help your family heal, not torture yourself with what-ifs." Marcus knew she was right logically, but emotionally he was drowning in the realization of how fragile everything was, how quickly a normal Tuesday morning could transform into catastrophe. "I don't know if I can go back to work, leaving them again after this." "Then don't, or do, but differently. Or do, but—" "Marcus, you've spent years building an empire because you never wanted to be powerless again. But the real power isn't in the money or the company. It's in being present for the people who matter. Figure out what that looks like for your family now." They sat in silence for a while, Marcus slowly regaining his composure. When he finally returned to Victoria's room, she looked at him with knowing eyes. "You okay?" "Getting there. How about you?" "Pain level. Manageable with the medications. Dr. Reyes says they'll start reducing the swelling medication tomorrow. Then we'll know about my legs." She said it calmly, but Marcus saw the fear flickering behind her eyes. "Whatever we find out, we handle it. I mean that, Victoria. Wheelchair walker, full mobility, doesn't change anything about us." "Says the man who can still run," she replied. But there was affection in her tone, not bitterness. "Says the man who loves you regardless of whether your legs work. Remember our vows, sickness and health? I wasn't just reciting pretty words." Megan was curled up in a chair, drowsy from her pain medication, watching her parents with ancient eyes. She'd aged years in the span of hours, Marcus realized. His little girl, who'd worried about getting the right backpack for second grade, had now kept 3 babies alive, in life-or-death circumstances. That kind of responsibility, that kind of terror, changed a person irreversibly. "We should probably talk to that child psychologist Jennifer found," Marcus said quietly. "Already ahead of you. Dr. Morrison is coming tomorrow morning. She specializes in childhood trauma. She'll evaluate all 4 kids and recommend treatment plans." Victoria shifted slightly, wincing. "We're going to get through this, Marcus, all of us, together." As if to punctuate her point, Mason chose that moment to spit up spectacularly all over Diane's shoulder, causing Megan to giggle, the first genuine laugh Marcus had heard from her since before the earthquake. It was a small moment of normalcy in an abnormal situation, but it felt significant. Life would continue. There would be laughter again. They would find their way back to being a family, even if the path looked different than they'd expected. That night, Marcus pulled out his phone and typed an email to his entire executive team. "Effective immediately. I'll be taking an indefinite leave of absence to focus on my family's recovery. Trust that the company is in excellent hands with our VP of Operations. When I return, and I will return, it will be in a reduced capacity that allows me to maintain proper work-life balance. We'll be restructuring to ensure no one person is as indispensable as I've made myself. Thank you for your understanding during this difficult time. He pressed send before he could second-guess himself. The company had been his identity for so long, the proof that he'd transcended his difficult origins. But Megan's voice on that phone call had reordered his priorities permanently. No amount of money was worth missing his children's lives. No acquisition was more important than being present for his family. Marcus looked around the hospital room, at his sleeping children, at his injured wife, at his mother-in-law keeping watch over them all, and felt something he hadn't expected. Despite everything they'd been through, despite the trauma and injuries and uncertain future, he felt lucky. Lucky that Megan had been brave. Lucky that the rescue team had been skilled. Lucky that he had the resources to ensure his family would receive the best care possible. Lucky to have a second chance to get his priorities right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Victoria's prognosis, the children's psychological evaluations, decisions about where they'd live since their home was destroyed. But tonight, they were all breathing, all together, all alive. And in the wake of disaster, that was everything. The morning sun filtered through hospital blinds in horizontal stripes, painting Victoria's recovery room in alternating bands of light and shadow. Marcus sat in the same chair he'd occupied for 3 days straight, watching the medical team prepare for the moment that would define their future. Dr. Reyes, the neurosurgeon, stood at the foot of Victoria's bed with a small pinwheel and a collection of instruments that looked deceptively simple for tools that would deliver life-changing news. Mrs. Thorne, I'm going to test the sensation and motor function in your lower extremities. I need you to tell me honestly what you feel. No wishful thinking, no trying to please me. Just the truth. Dr. Reyes's voice carried the weight of someone who'd delivered both miracles and heartbreaks, who understood that hope could be as dangerous as despair when it clouded reality. Victoria's hand found Marcus's and gripped it tightly. Megan sat in the corner with a coloring book, pretending not to listen, but Marcus could see the tension in her small shoulders. Diane had taken the triplets to the hospital's family lounge, sparing them from witnessing this moment. Some memories were too heavy for babies to carry, even unconsciously. Dr. Reyes began with Victoria's right foot, touching it with the pinwheel, then applying pressure, then asking her to flex. Marcus watched his wife's face intently, searching for any sign of sensation, any flicker of movement. Nothing. His heart sank. Dr. Reyes moved to the left foot. Same tests, same result. I can't feel anything, Victoria whispered, and Marcus heard her voice crack with the realization. It's just nothing. Like that part of my body doesn't exist anymore. Let's continue the assessment before we draw conclusions, Dr. Reyes said, but Marcus could hear the carefully controlled neutrality in his tone, the voice of someone managing expectations. The doctor moved higher, testing Victoria's calves, her knees, her thighs. At her upper thighs, Victoria suddenly gasped. I felt that. It was faint, like through layers of cotton, but I felt it. Doctor. Reyes's expression remained professionally neutral, but Marcus saw something shift in his eyes. Good. That's very good. Now I'm going to ask you to try to bend your knee. Don't worry if nothing happens. Just try. Victoria closed her eyes, her face contorting with concentration. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, her right knee bent. Maybe an inch, maybe less, but it moved. Marcus's breath caught. Victoria's eyes flew open, locking onto her leg as if she could will it to move further through sheer force of observation. Again, Dr. Reyes commanded. Left knee this time. Victoria tried, her whole body tensing with effort. This time the movement was even smaller, but it was there, real, undeniable. Tears began streaming down her face, and Marcus realized he was crying too. "What does this mean?" Marcus asked, his voice rough. "Doctor." Reyes set down his instruments and pulled up a chair, sitting at eye level with Victoria and Marcus, a gesture that signaled serious conversation rather than clinical detachment. "It means the spinal cord injury was incomplete. Some nerve pathways remain intact. The sensation in your upper thighs and the minimal motor function we're seeing indicate that with intensive rehabilitation you may regain significant mobility, but I need to be very clear about expectations." He paused, making sure he had their full attention. "This is not a miracle recovery story where you'll walk out of here in a few weeks. You're looking at months, possibly years, of intensive physical therapy. You may regain enough function to walk with assistance, braces, canes, walkers. You may plateau at wheelchair mobility with some ability to stand for transfers, or you may surprise everyone and achieve near full recovery. The human nervous system is remarkably plastic, especially with proper rehabilitation, but there are no guarantees." "But there's a chance?" Victoria's voice was small, childlike, stripped of all adult pretense. "A real chance?" "Yes, a real chance. Better than I initially expected based on the severity of your injuries." Dr. Reyes stood. "I'm recommending transfer to the rehabilitation center on the 4th floor. They have specialists who work specifically with spinal cord injuries. The sooner we start aggressive therapy, the better your chances of maximizing recovery." After Dr. Reyes left, Marcus and Victoria sat in silence for a long moment. Megan had abandoned her coloring book and climbed carefully onto the bed, nestling against her mother's side. "Does this mean you're going to be okay, Mummy?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But it means I have a chance to get better. And that's more than we thought I had yesterday." Victoria kissed the top of Megan's head. "How are you doing?" "Really doing?" Megan was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her words came out slowly, carefully chosen. "I keep having bad dreams. About the shaking. About not being able to find you. Last night I dreamed the hospital started falling down too. Grandma says it's normal to be scared after something scary happens. Doctor Morrison says the dreams will get better if I talk about them." Marcus felt a rush of gratitude toward the child psychologist Jennifer had found. Dr. Morrison had spent 2 hours with Megan yesterday, using play therapy and gentle questioning to help her begin processing the trauma. She'd also evaluated the triplets, though at 11 months their trauma responses would manifest differently: possible regression in development, attachment issues, hypervigilance around loud noises. "Dr. Morrison is right," Marcus said, pulling Megan onto his lap. "And you can always wake me up if you have bad dreams. Any time, middle of the night, doesn't matter. That's what daddies are for. Promise you won't go away again. Not for work trips or anything?" The question hit Marcus in the chest. He'd been wrestling with this exact issue: how to balance his responsibilities to the company with his responsibilities to his family, how to ensure he was present without completely abandoning the empire he'd built. But looking at his daughter's face, seeing the fear that lingered behind her eyes, the answer became crystal clear. "I promise. I'm restructuring everything so I can work mostly from home. When I do need to go to the office, it'll be during school hours, and I'll be back every single night. No more trips that take me far away. This family is my priority now." Megan studied his face with that unnervingly perceptive gaze that made her seem far older than 7. "Is it because of what happened? Because I don't want you to give up your job because of me?" "It's not giving up, sweetheart. It's choosing differently. I've spent a lot of years building a company, proving I could be successful. But the earthquake taught me something important. I already have the most important success right here." You, Mummy, your brothers and sister. Everything else is just details. Victoria reached out and took Marcus's hand. Are you sure about this? The company is nothing compared to you, any of you. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I'm tired of missing bedtimes and school plays and first steps because I'm in a conference room somewhere. Money doesn't hug you back. Success doesn't care if you're happy, but family does. Over the next week, their new reality took shape. Victoria was transferred to the rehabilitation center where she began the grueling work of teaching her body to function again. The physical therapy sessions were brutal, 3 hours a day of assisted stretching, electrical stimulation, attempts to activate dormant neural pathways. Marcus attended every session, learning the exercises so he could help Victoria practice between formal therapy times. Megan started seeing Dr. Morrison twice a week. Slowly, her nightmares decreased in frequency, though she remained hypervigilant about earthquakes, checking weather reports constantly, flinching at any rumbling sound, insisting on sleeping with a go-bag packed by her bed. Dr. Morrison assured them this was normal, that the hypervigilance would likely persist for months or even years, but would gradually diminish as Megan's sense of safety was restored. The triplets, remarkably, seemed largely unaffected. At 11 months, they were too young to retain conscious memories of the trauma, though Dr. Morrison warned they might show effects later. Potential anxiety around loud noises, possible attachment issues. For now, they were simply happy to have both parents nearby, even if one parent was in a hospital bed. Marcus made good on his promise to restructure his role at the company. He promoted his VP of Operations to co-CEO, with clear delineation of responsibilities that kept Marcus involved in strategic decisions while removing him from day-to-day management. He set up a home office with video conferencing capabilities that would allow him to attend meetings remotely. Most importantly, he established strict boundaries. No work before 8 a.m., no work after 6 p.m., and absolutely no work on weekends unless the building was literally on fire. His executive team adjusted surprisingly well. Some had privately worried about Marcus's intensity, his tendency to micromanage, his difficulty delegating. Now forced to operate with more autonomy, they discovered they were more capable than they'd realized. The company didn't collapse without Marcus's constant presence. If anything, it became more resilient, more adaptable. The media attention gradually shifted from breaking news to human interest stories. Marcus agreed to one interview with a local news anchor who'd covered the earthquake from the beginning and had reported on the rescue efforts with genuine empathy rather than sensationalism. He sat across from her in a borrowed conference room at the hospital, still wearing the jeans and t-shirt that had become his uniform, his tattoos fully visible. Mr. Thorne, you've become something of a symbol for devoted fatherhood. How does that feel? Marcus considered the question carefully. Honestly, strange. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I did what any parent would do. I went to my children when they needed me. The real hero of this story is my 7-year-old daughter who kept 3 babies alive in terrifying circumstances. The real heroes are the first responders who dug through rubble for hours to reach my family. I just showed up. Oh, but you did more than show up. You donated millions to rescue services. You're restructuring your entire company to prioritize family time. You're challenging stereotypes about what successful leadership looks like. If that's what people take from this, then good. But I want viewers to understand something important. Marcus leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera. I was judged my entire life because of how I look. People saw the tattoos and made assumptions about my character, my capabilities, my worth. I built a company partly to prove those people wrong. But the earthquake taught me that proving things to strangers is pointless. The only people whose opinions matter are the ones who love you, and they already know who you are. The interview aired that evening, and Marcus's phone exploded with messages. Fellow executives praising his vulnerability. Tattoo artists thanking him for positive representation. But the message that mattered most came from someone unexpected. The director of the foster care agency where Marcus had aged out of the system at 18. "Marcus, I've followed your career from a distance, always proud of what you accomplished but hesitant to reach out. Watching your interview tonight, I was struck by how you've taken the resilience you developed in foster care and channeled it into something beautiful. You survived a childhood that would have broken many people, and instead of becoming bitter, you became devoted to giving your own children the stability you never had. That's the real success story. I hope you know that the scared 18-year-old who left our facility with nothing but determination and anger has become a man worth admiring, not because of his wealth, but because of his heart." Marcus read the message 3 times, feeling something unlock in his chest that he hadn't known was still constricted. He'd spent so many years running from his past, trying to distance himself from the foster kid identity, proving he was more than his circumstances. But maybe the truth was simpler. He wasn't running from that kid. He was honoring him by building the life that kid had dreamed of, but never thought possible. 2 weeks after Victoria started rehabilitation, she stood for the first time. It lasted only 45 seconds, required 2 therapists supporting her weight, and left her sobbing with exhaustion afterward. But she stood. Marcus and Megan were there to witness it, and the moment Victoria's feet touched the ground, bearing even a fraction of her weight, Megan started cheering so loudly that nurses came running to see what the commotion was about. "I stood," Victoria kept repeating, laughing and crying simultaneously. "I actually stood." "You stood," Marcus confirmed, wiping tears from his own face unashamedly. "You're doing it, Victoria. You're coming back to us." Progress came in microscopic increments after that, standing for 1 minute, then 2, then 5. Eventually taking a single step while supported by parallel bars and 2 therapists. Each achievement was celebrated as the miracle it was. Dr. Morrison reminded them that Victoria's physical recovery was intrinsically linked to her mental health, that every small victory rebuilt not just her muscles, but her sense of agency and hope. The housing situation resolved itself unexpectedly when Marcus's company's real estate division offered a solution. They owned a property that had been slated for executive use, a modified ranch-style home with an open floor plan, wide doorways, and ground-level access throughout. It had been sitting empty for months while the company decided what to do with it. Marcus's co-CEO offered it to him at cost, with modifications to make it fully wheelchair accessible just in case Victoria's recovery plateaued. Marcus walked through the property with Diane while Victoria was in therapy. It was nothing like their previous home, simpler, smaller, designed for function rather than showing off wealth. But as he stood in the spacious living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden, he could picture it. Megan doing homework at the dining table, the triplets taking their first steps across these wide hallways, Victoria in her wheelchair or walker or on her own 2 feet, whichever outcome they faced, moving freely through accessible spaces. "It's perfect," Diane said quietly. "Not what you're used to, but perfect for what you need now." "We were never about the fancy house anyway. Victoria wanted it because of the school district for Megan. I wanted it to prove I'd made it. But this..." He gestured around the modest but comfortable space. "This is about what actually matters. Family. Function. Being together." They closed on the property within 2 weeks. Jennifer coordinated the logistics of moving their salvaged belongings from storage, the items that had been recovered from the earthquake ruins. It wasn't much: some photograph albums, Megan's favorite stuffed animals, Marcus's collection of business books, Victoria's art supplies. Everything else would need to be replaced. But those rescued items felt sacred, survivors of the same disaster that had nearly taken his family. 6 weeks after the earthquake, Victoria took her first unassisted step. Marcus wasn't there to see it. He'd run home to put the triplets down for their nap, while Diane stayed with Victoria during therapy. But Diane captured it on video, and when Marcus watched the shaky footage of his wife releasing the parallel bars and taking one wobbling, terrifying, beautiful step forward before the therapists caught her, he wept openly in his new kitchen. That evening, they celebrated with sparkling cider and a cake Megan had helped Diane decorate with slightly lopsided purple frosting. Victoria, still in her wheelchair but radiating pride, held Mason on her lap, while Noah and Chloe created an impressive mess with their cake slices. Megan had insisted on making a speech. "I want to say something," she announced, standing on her chair despite Marcus's automatic warning to be careful. "When everything was falling down and it was dark and scary, I thought we might not be a family anymore. But then Daddy came, and the rescue people came, and Mommy came back, and now we're all here eating cake. And I think that means we can handle anything. Even if bad things happen, we're still a family. So here's to Mommy's step, and here's to us." She raised her sippy cup of apple juice solemnly, and everyone clinked their glasses against it. In that moment, in their new modest home, with its accessible doorways and wide hallways, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Marcus felt wealthier than any corporate acquisition had ever made him. But that night, after the children were asleep and Victoria was settled in their new ground-floor bedroom, Marcus sat in his home office, reviewing documents Jennifer had sent. What he read made his blood run cold. The geological survey that had cleared their old neighborhood for development 10 years earlier had been fraudulent. A junior surveyor, pressured to meet deadlines and cut costs, had falsified data showing no significant fault lines in the area. The company that had employed him had either known or been negligently ignorant of the deception. Either way, dozens of families had built homes on land that should never have been approved for residential construction. Marcus's home had been at the epicenter of the damage because it sat directly above the unmarked fault line. If proper surveys had been conducted, no building permits would have been issued. His family would never have been in danger because they would never have lived there in the first place. The anger that rose in Marcus was unlike anything he'd felt before. This wasn't the cold corporate rage he could leverage in negotiations. This was primal, paternal, the fury of a father whose children had been endangered by someone's greed and negligence. His wife had nearly been paralyzed. His 7-year-old daughter had experienced trauma that might affect her for the rest of her life. His infant sons had been buried alive. All because someone had cut corners to save money. He spent the night reading through every document Jennifer had compiled. By morning, his course was clear. He called his attorney at 7 a.m. "I want to sue. Not just for my family, but for every family affected by this. Class action, maximum damages, and I want criminal charges pursued against everyone involved in falsifying those surveys. People died because of their negligence. Children died. That surveyor and his company need to be held accountable." His attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia, who'd handled Marcus's corporate cases for years, was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, I need to be honest with you. A case like this will take years. It will be expensive, exhausting, and extremely public. The defendant companies will throw everything they have at discrediting you and the other plaintiffs. They'll dig into your past, your finances, anything they can use. Are you prepared for that? My 7-year-old daughter kept 3 babies alive in rubble because someone falsified safety documents. Yes, Patricia, I'm prepared for that. Draft the paperwork. Find every family that was affected. And make sure that surveying company understands they're about to face the fight of their lives." When Marcus told Victoria about the lawsuit over breakfast, he expected her to be supportive, but cautious. Instead, she set down her coffee cup with trembling hands and said, "I want to testify. When this goes to trial, I want to look at those people who falsified the data and tell them exactly what they took from us. Victoria, testifying will mean reliving everything. The defense attorneys will question your memories, your recovery, everything. It won't be easy. Nothing about this has been easy. But if our story can prevent this from happening to another family, if it can ensure that companies can't cut corners on safety without consequences, then it's worth it." She reached across the table and took his hand. "We're survivors, Marcus. All of us. It's time we use that survival to create change." Marcus looked at his wife, still in her wheelchair, still fighting every day to regain function in her legs, but absolutely unbowed in spirit, and fell in love with her all over again. "Okay, we do this together then." Over the next 3 months, their lives found a new rhythm. Victoria's physical therapy continued with remarkable results. By week 8 post-earthquake, she could walk short distances with a walker. By week 10, she graduated to a cane. Her doctors were astonished by her progress, attributing it to her youth, her determination, and the quality of care she was receiving. But Marcus knew it was more than that. It was Victoria's sheer refusal to let the earthquake define her future. Megan returned to school, though Marcus and Victoria decided to hold her back and let her repeat 2nd grade. She'd missed too much instruction during the chaos, and Dr. Morrison suggested that the reduced academic pressure might help her recovery. Megan was initially devastated. Seeing herself held back felt like failure, until Marcus reframed it. "You're not being held back because you failed, sweetheart. You're getting a fresh start because you survived something extraordinary. You get to be a kid again for a year without carrying all that weight of what happened. That's not failure. That's a gift." The new school was smaller than her previous one, and the administration had been briefed on her trauma. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a grandmotherly woman with infinite patience, who seemed to understand when Megan needed extra support versus when she needed normalcy. Slowly, Megan began to smile more, to play at recess without constantly looking over her shoulder, to sleep through most nights without nightmares. The triplets were thriving. At 14 months, they were walking confidently, babbling in their own mysterious language and showing distinct personalities. Noah was the cautious observer, watching everything before attempting anything new. Chloe was the fearless explorer, climbing furniture and testing boundaries constantly. Mason was the empath, crying when others cried, laughing when others laughed, seeming to feel emotions on behalf of everyone around him. Marcus's relationship with his company continued to evolve. Working primarily from home, he discovered he was actually more effective than when he'd been in the office constantly. Video conferences eliminated the time waste of commuting. Focused work blocks at home were more productive than interrupted office hours. And his co-CEO was proving brilliantly capable of handling operations that Marcus had once thought required his personal attention. But the lawsuit became increasingly consuming. Patricia had assembled a plaintiffs' group of 43 families, everyone who'd lost homes in the earthquake, everyone who'd been injured, and the families of the 12 people who'd died. The surveying company and the development firm were fighting back viciously, exactly as Patricia had predicted. Their strategy became clear quickly. Paint Marcus as a wealthy opportunist using tragedy to get richer, while simultaneously arguing that the earthquake was an act of God that no survey could have predicted. Never mind that proper geological studies would have identified the fault line. Never mind that the falsified data was documented and undeniable. They were counting on public perception and legal technicalities to cloud the fundamental truth. Their negligence had killed people. Marcus sat through his first deposition in a nondescript conference room downtown, facing 3 defense attorneys who looked at him like he was something distasteful they'd found on their expensive shoes. They spent 6 hours trying to rattle him. Questions about his foster care background, his tattoos, his rapid accumulation of wealth, whether he'd ever been in legal trouble, whether his marriage was stable, whether he was a fit parent. Marcus answered every question with practiced calm, refusing to rise to the bait, but inside he was seething. These lawyers were trying to suggest that his character was relevant to whether their clients had falsified safety documents. It was absurd, offensive, and unfortunately effective legal strategy. When he came home that night, he found Victoria in their bedroom, practicing walking without her cane. She'd progressed to the point where she could manage maybe 20 steps unassisted before fatigue forced her to sit down. She looked up as Marcus entered, reading his face instantly. "Bad deposition? They tried to make me the villain. Asked me about being in foster care like it was criminal history. Asked about my tattoos, my marriage, everything except what actually matters, that their clients lied and people died because of it." Marcus sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. "Patricia says this is normal, that they're trying to find anything they can use against me. But it's hard not to feel like I'm back in school being judged by teachers who saw my bruises and assumed I was trouble." Victoria sat beside him, her hand finding his. "You survived their judgment then, and you'll survive it now. Because this time, you have something you didn't have then." "What's that?" "Proof. You built a successful company. You created a loving family. You responded to crisis with courage instead of collapse. They can question your character all they want, but your actions speak louder than their insinuations ever could." The lawsuit dragged on through summer and into fall. Depositions, document reviews, expert testimony about geological standards. Patricia was brilliant, building an ironclad case that even the defense attorneys seemed to recognize was unwinnable. But still they fought, because settling would mean admitting liability, and corporations would rather spend millions on legal fees than accept responsibility. Then, unexpectedly, the case found its turning point. A former employee of the surveying company came forward as a whistleblower. She'd been a junior surveyor at the time the fraudulent reports were filed, and she'd known they were falsified, but had been too afraid of losing her job to speak up. Now carrying 10 years of guilt over the deaths that had resulted from her silence, she was willing to testify. Her testimony was devastating. She had emails, internal memos, documentation of cost-cutting pressures from senior management, everything needed to prove not just negligence but deliberate fraud. The defense attorneys tried to discredit her. She was a disgruntled former employee. She had her own motivations. She couldn't be trusted. But her documentation was too thorough, her testimony too detailed, her remorse too genuine. 2 weeks after her deposition, the defense requested a settlement conference. Marcus sat in Patricia's office reviewing the proposed settlement terms. $250 million distributed among the plaintiff families, with amounts weighted based on injury severity and property damage. Criminal charges against 3 senior surveyors, permanent revocation of the surveying company's license, public admission of fault. "It's a good settlement," Patricia said. "More than I expected to get, honestly. The whistleblower testimony changed everything. They know they'll lose at trial and they're trying to avoid the spectacle. The question is whether you want to accept or push for trial anyway." Marcus thought about what trial would mean. Months more of legal battles, reliving the trauma, subjecting his family to continued scrutiny. Then he thought about the other families, people who didn't have his resources, who needed closure, who couldn't afford to wait years for justice. What do the other plaintiffs want? Most want to settle. They're tired, Marcus. They want to rebuild their lives. The settlement gives them financial security and forces accountability. For most of them, that's enough. Then we settle. Not because they've paid enough for what they did. No amount of money brings back the dead or erases the trauma. But because dragging this out for years helps no one except the lawyers. He looked at Patricia pointedly. No offense. None taken. I agree with your decision. This is about justice, not revenge, and this settlement delivers justice. The settlement was finalized in early November, almost 9 months after the earthquake. Marcus stood at a press conference alongside the other plaintiffs, reading a prepared statement. No amount of money compensates for what was taken from us, but this settlement establishes an important precedent. Companies cannot cut corners on safety without consequences. Criminal charges have been filed, licenses have been revoked. And most importantly, geological survey standards have been reformed to prevent this from ever happening again. That's what justice looks like, not just punishment for past wrongs, but protection against future ones. By December, 11 months after the earthquake and approaching what would be the first anniversary in just weeks, the Thorne family had found their new normal. Victoria could walk unassisted for extended periods, though she still used her cane for longer distances and when she was tired. Her doctors considered her recovery extraordinary. She'd regained approximately 85% of her pre-injury mobility, far exceeding initial projections. Megan was thriving in school, her nightmares reduced to maybe once a month. She'd made new friends who knew her as the brave girl who'd saved her siblings, not as the traumatized victim. Dr. Morrison had reduced their sessions to once monthly, confident that Megan was developing healthy coping mechanisms and processing her trauma appropriately. The triplets were now walking, talking toddlers with distinct personalities and no apparent lasting effects from their ordeal. Noah loved books and would sit for hours having stories read to him. Chloe was obsessed with music and dancing, often creating impromptu performances that the whole family had to watch. Mason remained the empath, always the first to notice if someone was sad and offer a hug. Marcus had discovered something unexpected in his reduced work schedule. He was a better CEO, working less. The strategic decisions he made from his home office were more thoughtful, more considered, because he wasn't rushing from meeting to meeting. His leadership style had shifted from micromanagement to true delegation, and the company was stronger for it. Profits hadn't dropped, despite his reduced hours. If anything, they'd improved as newly empowered executives took ownership of their departments. But the real transformation was in the moments that filled his days. Breakfast with his children every morning, being home when Megan returned from school, reading bedtime stories every single night, having dinner as a family without his phone buzzing with urgent work messages. These were the moments that made the restructuring worthwhile, the moments that proved success wasn't measured in market share, but in memories created. 2 weeks before Christmas, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the search and rescue commander who'd led the operation to save his family. They'd kept in loose touch over the months. Marcus had made good on his donation commitment, plus additional funding for equipment upgrades. But this call was different. Mr. Thorne, I wanted to tell you personally before you hear it elsewhere. Your donation has changed everything for our department. We've been able to purchase thermal imaging drones, advanced listening equipment, and train specialized teams in urban disaster response. Last week, we responded to a building collapse across the state. Using the equipment your funding purchased, we located and rescued a family of 4 who were buried for 36 hours. A mother and 3 children. Without that equipment, we wouldn't have found them in time. Marcus felt emotion surge in his throat. You saved them. We saved them using tools that exist because your family survived and you chose to help others. Those 4 people are alive because of what your daughter did, because of your response to tragedy. I thought you should know that the ripple effects of that terrible day are still creating good in the world. After the call ended, Marcus sat in his home office for a long moment processing. The earthquake had taken so much: Megan's innocence, Victoria's physical wholeness, their sense of safety, their home. But it had also revealed things: the strength of his daughter's courage, the depth of his wife's resilience, the importance of presence over prestige, the way tragedy could transform into purpose. That evening at dinner, Marcus shared Lieutenant Chen's news with his family. The equipment we donated helped save a family last week. A mum and 3 kids buried in rubble, alive because of tools that exist, because of what we survived. Megan looked up from her pasta, her 7-year-old face contemplative. So something good came from what happened to us. Lots of good, actually. Better building codes, reformed survey standards. Families who received settlement money to rebuild their lives, and now other families being saved. None of that erases what we went through, but it means our suffering wasn't meaningless. I don't think I want to forget what happened, Megan said slowly, working through complex thoughts with the seriousness that had characterized her since the earthquake. I used to wish I could forget, that I could go back to how things were before. But now I think remembering is important because it makes me appreciate everything more. Like I used to get mad when Mason cried at night and woke me up. Now I'm happy he's crying because it means he's alive and healthy and home. Victoria reached over and took Megan's hand. That's a very wise way to think about it, sweetheart. The earthquake changed us. We carry those scars. Some you can see, like Mommy's cane, and some you can't, like the nightmares. But we also carry the proof that we survived, that we're strong enough to handle hard things. That's worth remembering. Christmas that year was deliberately modest. Instead of the elaborate decorations and expensive gifts of previous years, the Thorns focused on presents over presents. They strung popcorn and cranberries for the tree, made ornaments from construction paper and glitter, baked cookies together in their new kitchen. On Christmas morning, the gifts were thoughtful rather than extravagant. Art supplies for Victoria to resume her painting, books for Megan about brave girls throughout history, educational toys for the triplets. But the gift Marcus was most proud of wasn't under the tree. It was the announcement he made over Christmas breakfast. I've been working with Jennifer and Patricia on something special. You know how we received settlement money from the lawsuit? Well, I've been thinking about what to do with our portion, and I'd like to propose we use it to create something meaningful. He pulled out a portfolio Jennifer had prepared, the Megan Foundation for Childhood Trauma Recovery. It would provide free counseling for children who've experienced disasters, fund research into pediatric trauma treatment, and create educational programs teaching kids emergency preparedness skills. But here's the important part. I'm not just funding it. I want our whole family to be involved. Megan, you could help design the preparedness programs based on what you learned. Victoria, you could teach art therapy classes for recovering children. And as the triplets get older, they can participate too. Megan's eyes went wide. You want to name it after me? You saved your siblings. You showed remarkable courage and quick thinking. But more than that, you've shown incredible resilience in recovering from trauma. Kids who experience disasters need to know they can survive and thrive afterward. Who better to represent that message than you? Megan looked at her mother, then back at Marcus, processing the weight of what he was proposing. Would I have to talk about what happened? Would people know it was me? Only as much as you're comfortable with. The foundation does the work regardless of whether you want to be publicly involved. But I thought you might like knowing that your experience is helping other kids, that what you survived has purpose beyond our family. Megan thought about it for a long moment, her face serious. Then she smiled, the genuine, full-hearted smile that Marcus hadn't seen often since the earthquake, but that was returning more frequently now. I think that would be good. Maybe other kids won't be as scared if they know someone else survived something scary. Victoria was crying softly. happy tears streaming down her face. I think it's perfect, all of it, using our pain to create healing for others. That's the best kind of memorial for what we survived. Door. The foundation launched in January, 10 months after the earthquake. The media coverage was extensive but respectful, focusing on the mission rather than sensationalizing the family's trauma. Marcus did one interview with the same local anchor who'd covered the earthquake, explaining the foundation's purpose. My daughter was 7 years old when she kept 3 babies alive in circumstances that would terrify most adults. She showed me what real courage looks like, not the absence of fear, but action, despite fear. This foundation exists to honor that courage and to ensure other children have the support they need to recover from traumatic experiences with their resilience intact. The interviewer asked about his tattoos, a question Marcus had anticipated. People used to see these tattoos and make assumptions about who I was, what I was capable of, whether I was trustworthy. The earthquake taught me that what's on the outside is irrelevant. What matters is how you respond when life tests you. These tattoos tell the story of my survival, my journey from foster care to fatherhood. But the real story isn't written on my skin. It's written in how I show up for my family every single day. The interview resonated widely, particularly in the foster care community. Marcus began receiving letters from former foster youth who'd seen themselves in his story, who'd felt encouraged by his success, who needed to know that difficult beginnings didn't determine endings. He responded to each letter personally, understanding how much it would have meant to his 18-year-old self to receive encouragement from someone who'd walked the same path. By spring, 15 months post-earthquake, the foundation had served over 300 children. Free counseling programs were operating in 5 states. Research grants were funding studies into childhood trauma recovery. And Megan, now 8 years old and thriving, had recorded a video message that played for families entering the program. "Hi, I'm Megan. When I was 7, an earthquake destroyed my house. I had to protect my baby siblings in the dark while everything fell down around us. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. For a long time after, I had nightmares. I was afraid of loud noises. I didn't want my daddy to ever leave because I thought something bad might happen again. But I talked to a really nice doctor who helped me understand that being scared is okay. That what happened to me was real and scary, but it doesn't mean scary things will keep happening. And now I still remember what happened, but I'm not afraid all the time anymore. If something scary happened to you, I want you to know that it's okay to be scared, it's okay to need help, and it's okay to take time to feel better. You're going to be okay, I promise." Victoria returned to painting, creating a series of works she titled Aftermath. The paintings were abstract expressions of trauma and recovery, dark, chaotic pieces gradually transitioning to lighter, more hopeful compositions. She donated several to be auctioned for the foundation's benefit, and they sold for surprising amounts. One piece, titled Still Standing, showed a solitary figure rising from darkness into light, and it brought Victoria more recognition as an artist than anything she'd created before the earthquake. "Tragedy gave me something to say," she explained to Marcus one evening as she worked on a new piece. "Before, my art was pretty but empty. Now it has meaning. It has purpose. I'm not glad the earthquake happened. I'd never wish that experience on anyone. But I can be grateful for how it transformed me." Marcus understood exactly what she meant. The earthquake had destroyed their physical home, but had rebuilt their family stronger than before. He'd learned that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in moments. That success wasn't about corner offices, but about being present. That love wasn't a feeling, but a choice made daily to show up, to be vulnerable, to prioritize what mattered. On a late January morning, exactly 1 year after the earthquake that had tested them so profoundly, the family held a private ceremony in their garden. They'd planted a tree, a strong oak that would grow for generations, surviving storms and seasons, deepening its roots even when buffeted by winds. Around the base of the tree, they placed stones engraved with words that mattered: courage, resilience, family, hope, survival, love. Megan placed her stone first, a purple rock she'd painted with all their names intertwined. I want to remember that we're all connected, that what happens to one of us matters to all of us. Victoria's stone was engraved with a single word: gratitude. For every day I can walk, every moment with my children, every morning I wake up beside your father. This stone reminds me not to take anything for granted. Marcus's stone read, present, because being here, fully here, is the only thing that actually matters. They let the triplets place stones too. Noah's covered in pictures of books, Chloe's decorated with musical notes, Mason's painted with hearts. At 26 months old now, the triplets wouldn't consciously remember this ceremony, but someday they'd see the tree and the stones and understand that they were part of a family that had survived impossible things. Standing in their garden that evening, Marcus looked at his family, his wife walking without her cane, his daughter laughing at something Noah had done, his 3 toddlers creating joyful chaos, and felt complete in a way that no business success had ever provided. The journey from that terrifying phone call to this moment had been agonizing, transformative, and ultimately redemptive. They'd lost a house, but gained perspective. They'd experienced trauma, but developed resilience. They'd faced the fragility of life and chose to live more fully because of it. The earthquake had tested them in ways Marcus never could have imagined, but they'd passed that test not by emerging unchanged, but by transforming together. As twilight deepened and the first stars appeared, Marcus gathered his family close. I want you all to know something. The earthquake was the worst day of my life. But everything since, watching Mommy learn to walk again, seeing Megan's courage honored through the foundation, witnessing our family grow stronger, these have been some of the best days. Not despite what we survived, but because of it. We learned what we're made of, and we're made of pretty strong stuff. The strongest, Megan agreed, leaning against her father's side. Unbreakable, Victoria added, her hand finding Marcus's. The triplets, sensing the emotional moment even if they couldn't understand it, clustered around their parents, creating the kind of family pile that happened spontaneously and felt sacred in its simplicity. Marcus looked down at them, his entire world contained in this small gathering, and knew with absolute certainty that he'd finally achieved the success he'd been chasing his whole life. Not the corner office or the stock options or the mansion, not the validation of strangers or the accumulation of wealth. But this, a family that loved each other fiercely, that showed up for each other consistently, that chose resilience over bitterness and hope over despair. A family that would carry the scars of trauma but wouldn't be defined by them. A family that turned survival into purpose, that transformed personal tragedy into collective healing. As they stood together in the garden, surrounding the tree that would outlive them all, Marcus sent a silent thank you to that 7-year-old girl who'd kept her siblings alive in the dark, to the first responders who dug through rubble for hours, to the medical teams who'd saved his wife, to every person who'd played a role in bringing his family home. The earthquake had taken much, but it had also revealed everything that mattered. And standing there with his family, Marcus Thorne, former foster kid, tattooed CEO, devoted father, survivor, finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy. It meant having people to love who loved you back. It meant being present for the moments that actually mattered. It meant choosing connection over isolation, vulnerability over protection, presence over prestige. It meant being home, in every sense that mattered, with the people who made home worth fighting for. The tree would grow tall and strong, its roots deep, its branches reaching towards sky, and someday, when Megan and the triplets were grown with children of their own, they'd return to this garden and remember. They came from survivors, from fighters, from a family that faced the unthinkable and chose love over fear, hope over despair, together over apart. That legacy, Marcus thought, was worth more than any empire, and it would outlast any fortune. This was what it meant to truly come home.